In 1958, a Pan Am passenger flying from New York to Paris was handed a menu with 7 courses on it, served on real china, with a silver bowl of caviar and champagne poured a dintumt at 30,000 feet. The ticket cost more than most people earned in a month. Today, you get a bag of pretzels and a plastic cup. Number 14 on this list was carved tableside from a rolling cart. Number 3 was set on fire right in front of you. These 25 meals belong to a time when flying was the event, not the inconvenience. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten airline meals from the golden age of flying. Number 25, the clear consomme. Every great meal in the sky started with a whisper, not a shout. Before the steak, before the carving cart, a flight attendant would set down a shallow bowl of clear amber consomme, steaming in the pressurized cabin. This was double-strength beef broth, clarified until you could read a menu through it, finished with a splash of sherry poured at the seat. It sounds like nothing. It was everything. The whole point was to prove the galley up front was a real kitchen, not warming things in foil. On TWA and Pan Am flights in the late 1950s, that first sip told you exactly what kind of afternoon you were in for. It cost the airline pennies from bones and trimmings, but it signaled a level of care that ran through every course after it. Number 24, the shrimp cocktail. Here is a dish that looked like $1 million and cost the airline almost nothing. 4 or 5 chilled jumbo shrimp hung over the rim of a stemmed glass, a cup of red cocktail sauce nested in crushed ice at the center. In the 1960s, shrimp was still an occasion food for most American families, something you ordered at a supper club on an anniversary. Getting it at 35,000 feet felt outrageous, almost naughty. United and American both served it in first class, and the presentation never changed because it never needed to. Passengers who had spent the Depression eating beans and cornbread now found themselves peeling chilled shrimp above the Atlantic, and many never got over the strangeness of it. It was the single most photographed dish of the jet age. It looked like you had made it. Number 23, the relish tray. Long before anyone said the word crudité out loud, the airlines were serving one, and they were serving it with confidence. A silver dish, divided into compartments, would come down the aisle loaded with celery hearts, carrot curls, radish roses, ripe olives, sweet gherkins, and little rolled slices of pickled beet. It sat on the table for the whole meal, something to nibble between courses while the wine did its work. This was practical genius disguised as luxury. Fresh vegetables held up beautifully at altitude when nothing else did. They stayed crisp, they cost the airline almost nothing, and they gave nervous flyers something to do with their hands. On Braniff and Continental flights out of Texas, that relish tray was a fixture of the service, refilled without being asked. The radish roses were cut by hand in the commissary at dawn by workers whose entire job was to make a vegetable look like a flower. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody would think it was worth the labor. Back then, it was simply how you treated a guest. Number 22, vichyssoise. Somewhere over Kansas, a flight attendant would set down a chilled bowl of pale green-white soup and call it by its French name, and half the cabin would have no idea what it was. Vichyssoise is cold potato and leek soup, thickened with cream, served ice-cold with a scatter of chopped chives across the top. Serving a cold soup on an airplane was a small act of showing off. It meant the galley had refrigeration, timing, and the nerve to hand a Midwestern businessman something chilled and green and dare him to enjoy it. And he did. The cold soup was refreshing in a dry cabin that dehydrated everyone on board, and the richness of the cream made it feel like a treat rather than a health food. Pan Am served it on transatlantic routes through the 1960s, always cold, always with the chives. Today, if an airline served you cold potato soup, you would assume the heater was broken. Back then, it meant the kitchen was so good, it could afford to serve you something on purpose that other places served by accident. Number 21, deviled eggs and canapés. Before the main event, the drinks cart came through, and it did not come through empty. Alongside your martini or your old-fashioned, mixed properly by a flight attendant who had been trained to make them, came a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. Deviled eggs piped with seasoned yolk and dusted with paprika. Tiny toast points spread with liver pate. Rolls of ham wrapped around cream cheese and a spear of asparagus. Little rounds of pumpernickel topped with a curl of smoked salmon. These were finger foods designed to make the cocktail hour feel like a party, because that is exactly what the airlines wanted the front cabin to be. In an era when a transatlantic flight took 10 or 12 hours, the meal was not just fuel, it was entertainment, the thing that broke the endless drone of the engines into acts and intermissions. The canapés were the opening act. A flight attendant on TWA's ambassador service might build 200 of these by hand on a single crossing, and everyone looked like it belonged at a Manhattan cocktail party, which, floating above the ocean, it kind of did. Number 20, green turtle soup. This is the one that makes modern audiences flinch, and it should. In the 1950s and into the 1960s, real green turtle soup was considered the height of sophistication, and the airlines served it to prove they belonged among the finest dining rooms in the world. It was a dark, rich, sherry-laced broth made from actual sea turtle, thickened and deeply savory, ladled from a tureen at the front of the cabin. Fine restaurants in New York and London served it. Ocean liners served it. So the airlines, desperate to match the luxury of the great ships they were replacing, served it too. A tin of turtle soup was a genuine delicacy, expensive and prestigious, and offering it in the sky was a way of saying this airline spares nothing. Of course, we know now what that cost. Sea turtles were hunted to the edge of extinction, partly to fill those tureens, and the dish vanished from menus once the animals became protected in the 1970s. It is a strange, uncomfortable piece of history. A meal that was once the ultimate status symbol is now something we are simply grateful stopped. First, pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. The reason airlines poured this much effort into food was not generosity. It was war. In the 1950s and into the 1960s, the airlines were locked in a competition so fierce it was nearly desperate because the government controlled the ticket prices. Fares were set by regulators, which meant no airline could win by being cheaper. If a flight from New York to Los Angeles cost the same on every carrier, the only thing left to compete on was the experience. So they went to war with forks. Pan Am hired Maxims de Paris to design its menus. Braniff hired the Italian designer Emilio Pucci to make the uniforms and an architect to redesign the entire cabin. United built the largest flight kitchen in the world. Every carved roast, every flaming dessert, every silver caviar bowl was a weapon in a battle for your loyalty. When the government deregulated the airlines in 1978 and let them compete on price at last, the food died almost overnight. It turned out the golden age of flying was not built on love. It was built on a loophole. And the moment the loophole closed, the caviar disappeared. Number 19, the Scandinavian smorgasbord. Scandinavian Airlines, SAS, took one look at the French-obsessed competition and did something completely different. They served their own heritage, and it became legendary. The SAS smorgasbord was a rolling table of cold dishes wheeled through the cabin, and passengers could point at whatever they wanted. Pickled herring in 3 different sauces, cold, poached salmon with dill, sliced roast reindeer, liver pate, cured meats, cheeses, tiny boiled potatoes, and dark rye bread. It was abundance you could see and choose from, which felt entirely different from being handed a fixed plate. On the polar routes over the top of the world, connecting Scandinavia to America, this spread became a destination in itself. Businessmen booked SAS specifically for it. The airline understood something its rivals missed. Luxury was not only about the single perfect plate. Sometimes luxury was choice, the simple wealthy feeling of standing in front of more food than one person could eat and being told to help yourself. It cost real money to stock and required a flight attendant to manage a moving buffet at altitude, but it built a following that lasted for decades. Number 18, caviar service. Nothing said golden age like the caviar cart. In first class on Pan Am, TWA, and the European carriers, a flight attendant would arrive with a silver bowl of gray-black beluga or Sevruga caviar nested in crushed ice, surrounded by the traditional accompaniments. Chopped white and yolk of hard-boiled egg, minced red onion, capers, lemon wedges, points of toast, and tiny buckwheat blini. And beside it, a bottle of ice-cold vodka or champagne. The caviar was spooned onto your plate, and you built each bite yourself, exactly as you would at a restaurant in Paris. This was the single most expensive thing the airline put in front of you, and it was, for many Americans, the first caviar of their lives. The little black pearls popped against the tongue, salty and briny and strange, and passengers either fell in love or politely reached for more toast. Real beluga was not cheap even then, and airlines went through staggering quantities of it. It was the ultimate proof that up front, price was no object, and the whole cabin knew when the caviar cart came out that the meal had officially begun. Number 17, the steak in the sky. Braniff International, the flashy Texas airline that hired designers and painted its planes in bright colors, built an entire reputation on beef. Their filet mignon service was famous, and it was aimed squarely at the American businessman who wanted a proper steak, not fussy French cooking. A thick, tender filet was grilled in the galley, seared on the outside, pink in the middle, and served with a baked potato loaded with sour cream and chives, plus a vegetable and a roll. This was steakhouse dinner at cruising altitude, and it was exactly what the market wanted. In an era when a night out meant a steak and a martini, Braniff gave you both above the clouds. The beef was good beef, not the tough gray protein of later decades, and the flight attendants were trained to ask how you wanted it cooked. On the flagship routes, that steak came with wine poured freely and a dessert cart to follow. Braniff understood its customer perfectly. He did not want turtle soup. He wanted a steak, and he wanted it treated like it mattered. Number 16, the Cornish game hen. When an airline wanted to serve poultry that felt special rather than ordinary, it reached for the Cornish game hen, a small, tender whole bird that fit perfectly on a first-class plate. Roasted golden and served with wild rice stuffing, a glaze of currant jelly, and a spoon of pan gravy, it looked like a miniature holiday dinner made just for you. This was clever airline thinking. A whole bird on the plate felt luxurious and complete in a way that a slice of anything never could. It came with its own little drama, the passenger navigating the small bones with a real knife and fork on a linen tablecloth, and it photographed beautifully in the airline's advertising. American Airlines and others served versions of it through the 1960s. The hen was mild and tender, easy to like, and it gave the meat course variety on routes where the steak and the roast rotated week after week. A whole bird, glistening and golden, delivered to your seat above the ocean. It was the kind of detail that made people write letters home about the flight. Number 15, lobster thermidor. This is the dish that told the world the airlines had lost their minds in the best possible way. Lobster thermidor is lobster meat pulled from the shell, bound in a rich, creamy sauce, spiked with mustard and brandy, spooned back into the shell, topped with cheese, and browned under heat until bubbling. Making it in a real kitchen is a project. Making it in an airplane galley was borderline insane, and yet the great carriers did it. Pan Am and the European Airlines served lobster on transatlantic first class, and thermidor was the crown jewel version, the one that arrived still in its shell, dramatic and unmistakable. The sauce was decadent, the lobster sweet, and the whole thing carried the unmistakable message that no expense had been spared. Passengers who had never seen a whole lobster outside of a coastal vacation now found one steaming on their tray table over the middle of the Atlantic. It was excessive. It was theatrical. It was exactly the point. In the golden age, restraint was the enemy, and lobster thermidor was the airlines showing off with both hands. Second pattern break. Here is something the airlines figured out that food scientists have only confirmed recently. The cabin is fighting you the entire time you eat. At cruising altitude, the air is pressurized to around 8,000 feet, dry as a desert, and roaring with background noise. That combination does something strange to your body. It flattens your sense of taste, especially your ability to perceive sweet and salty flavors, by as much as 30%. Your palate at 35,000 feet is essentially half numb. The Golden Age chefs did not have the studies, but they had the tongues, and they compensated by instinct. They seasoned harder. They leaned on rich, fatty sauces and strong flavors like sherry, mustard, and brandy that could punch through the numbness. They served bold cheeses and dishes built around umami. This is why airline food used to taste of something and now so often tastes of nothing. The modern airlines, cutting costs, stopped compensating for the cabin. The old kitchens knew that to feed a person in the sky, you had to cook louder than you would on the ground. And they did. Number 14, the roast sirloin carved tableside. This was the showpiece of the service, the moment the whole cabin turned to watch. A flight attendant or purser would wheel a heavy cart down the aisle, bearing a whole roast sirloin of beef under a domed cover, and stop at your row. Then, with a long carving knife and fork, right there beside your seat, he would slice the roast to your preference. End cut or center, rare or medium, as thick or thin as you liked. The slices were laid on your plate along with roasted potatoes, Yorkshire pudding, and a boat of pan juice, and the cart rolled on to the next row. Imagine the confidence that took. A man balancing a carving knife against a whole roast of beef in a moving aircraft, doing it with the calm of a maitre d' at a grand hotel. On United's red carpet service and the transatlantic flights of the era, this carving cart was the centerpiece. It made the meal feel bespoke, cut just for you, and it turned dinner into a performance. Nothing on a modern plane comes close to the theater of that cart. Number 13, chicken Kiev. There was a stretch in the 1960s when chicken Kiev appeared on nearly every fine dining menu in America, and the airlines rode the wave. Chicken Kiev is a boneless chicken breast wrapped around a core of cold herb and garlic butter, breaded and cooked so that when you cut into it, the melted butter bursts out across the plate. On the ground, in a restaurant, that burst was the whole delight of the dish. On an airplane, it was a gamble, and the airlines took it anyway. Served with rice pilaf and a vegetable, it delivered a little moment of surprise and drama at the tray table, that first cut releasing a pool of golden garlic butter. It was rich, indulgent, and exactly the kind of continental sophistication that first-class passengers wanted to be seen ordering. The dish required careful timing in the galley, so the butter stayed cold in the center until it hit the heat, which meant real skill from the crew. When chicken Kiev faded from restaurant fashion in the 1980s, it faded from the skies too, another casualty of changing tastes and shrinking budgets. Number 12. Beef Wellington. If the airlines wanted to prove they could do the hardest thing in cooking, they made beef Wellington. A whole beef tenderloin coated in a mushroom duxelles and sometimes pâté, wrapped entirely in puff pastry and baked until the pastry is golden and shattering and the beef inside is still pink. It is a dish that intimidates professional chefs on solid ground. Getting the pastry crisp and the beef rare in a galley oven, then slicing it cleanly at altitude, was an act of real culinary bravado. But on the premium transatlantic routes, that is exactly what passengers were served. A thick slice of Wellington showing off its perfect layers, the pastry, the dark mushroom, the rosy beef. It was the most impressive thing on the menu precisely because everyone understood how hard it was to pull off. This was the airline equivalent of a magician doing the trick that could go wrong and doing it flawlessly 30,000 feet in the air. When you cut into a slice of Wellington over the ocean, you were tasting the peak of what airline kitchens were willing to attempt. Ambition on a plate. Number 11, duck à l'orange. Nothing announced French sophistication like a duck in orange sauce, and the airlines that partnered with the great Paris kitchens served it proudly. Duck à l'orange is roast duck, its skin rendered crisp and glossy, napped in a sauce built from orange, sugar cooked to caramel, and a splash of orange liqueur, balanced between sweet and sharp. It was the definition of continental elegance in the 1960s, the dish you ordered to seem worldly, and Pan Am's Maxim's designed menus put it in front of passengers crossing to Europe. The sweetness of the orange cut through the richness of the duck, and the crisp skin gave way to tender meat underneath. Serving duck at all on a plane was ambitious, because duck done poorly is greasy and tough, and the galley crews had to render it right. Done well, it was spectacular, a full French bistro classic delivered above the clouds with a glass of Bordeaux beside it. Duck à l'orange became almost a cliché of fine dining in that era, precisely because it was so beloved, and for a while the finest place to eat it was on an airplane. Number 10, coq au vin. Here was the dish that proved the airlines understood real cooking, not just showpieces. Coq au vin is chicken braised slowly in red wine with mushrooms, pearl onions, and bacon lardons, until the meat is falling apart and the sauce is deep and glossy and dark. Unlike the flashier dishes, coq au vin actually improved with time, which made it perfect for airline service. It could be prepared in the commissary, held, and gently reheated in the galley without losing a thing, because a braise only gets better as it sits. Passengers got a genuinely soulful rustic French dinner, the kind of food that a grandmother in Burgundy might have simmered all afternoon, served with buttered noodles or potatoes to catch the sauce. It was comfort disguised as sophistication, and it worked beautifully in the demanding conditions of a cabin, its bold, winey flavor punching straight through the altitude numbness. While the carving carts and flaming desserts got the attention, dishes like coq au vin were the quiet backbone of the Golden Age menu, real cooking that held its dignity from the ground kitchen all the way to your tray table. Number 9, Rack of lamb. When an airline wanted the single most elegant meat presentation possible, it served a rack of lamb, and it dressed it up. The rack was roasted with an herb crust, the bones Frenched clean and sometimes capped with little paper frills, and it was carved into individual chops, either in the galley or at your seat. Pink in the center, crusted with rosemary and garlic on the outside, served with mint sauce and small roasted vegetables, it was as close to a formal restaurant dinner as an airplane could deliver. Lamb was not everyday food for most Americans in the 1960s, which gave it an air of the exotic and the refined. And the visual drama of those Frenched bones made the plate look like it belonged in a magazine. The premium carriers served it on their flagship routes, and the flight attendants presented it with the ceremony it deserved. Rack of lamb was the meat course for the passenger who had already had the steak, already had the roast beef, and wanted something that felt like the next tier up. It was luxury for people who were running out of luxuries to be impressed by. Number 8. Chateaubriand. This was the aristocrat of the beef courses, and only the top carriers served it. Chateaubriand is a thick cut from the center of the beef tenderloin, the most tender part of the animal, roasted whole and traditionally carved and served for a table to share, draped in a rich sauce like béarnaise or a red wine reduction. On the finest transatlantic first-class flights, this was the crown of the meat service, wheeled out on a cart, carved tableside into thick, buttery medallions, and plated with chateau potatoes and delicate vegetables. The tenderloin was so soft you could nearly cut it with the side of a fork. Béarnaise sauce, that luxurious emulsion of egg yolk, butter, and tarragon, is temperamental and difficult even in a professional kitchen, and making it hold together in a galley was another small miracle the crews performed routinely. Chateaubriand carried the name of a 19th century French aristocrat, and eating it in the sky carried that same borrowed nobility. This was the beef course for people who wanted the best cut of the best animal, prepared the most classical way, and the Golden Age airlines gave it to them without blinking. Third pattern break. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud about the Golden Age. The reason the food was so extraordinary is that flying was only for the rich. That 7-course meal, that caviar cart, that carved roast beef existed because the person eating it had paid a fortune for the privilege. Adjusted for today's money, a transatlantic ticket in 1960 could cost the equivalent of $5,000 or $10,000, sometimes more. Ordinary families did not fly. They took the train or the bus, or they simply did not go. The Golden Age we get so misty-eyed about was a walled garden, and most Americans were on the outside of the wall looking in. When deregulation came and prices collapsed, the caviar vanished. Yes, but something else happened too. Flying opened up. A school teacher could visit her grandchildren across the country. A working family could see the ocean for the first time. We lost the lobster thermidor, and we gained the entire middle class in the sky. It is worth remembering that the meals were never really the miracle. The miracle was who eventually got to climb aboard. Number 7. Whole poached salmon. On the finest crossings, the fish course was not a fillet slid onto a plate. It was a whole poached salmon, presented in glory. The entire fish was poached gently, cooled, and coated in aspic, its skin often decorated with thin slices of cucumber laid like scales, a lemon in its mouth, dill scattered across the platter. It was carried through the cabin on a large silver tray so passengers could admire it before it was portioned and served with a cool herbed mayonnaise or hollandaise. This was cold kitchen artistry, the kind of thing you would see at a grand hotel buffet or an ambassador's reception, and the airlines recreated it at altitude. The salmon was mild, delicate, and cool against the dry, warm air of the cabin, a refreshing contrast to all the rich hot courses. Presenting a whole decorated fish took real skill from the commissary chefs, who spent the morning laying those cucumber scales one at a time. It served no purpose but beauty, and that was exactly why it belonged in the Golden Age. When was the last time an airline showed you anything just because it was beautiful? Number 6, the cheese and fruit cart. Before dessert, in the European tradition the airlines borrowed, came the cheese course, and it arrived on its own rolling cart. A selection of cheeses at perfect ripeness, brie, soft, and oozing at the edges, a wedge of sharp cheddar, a blue-veined and pungent, a nutty Gruyere, laid out beside clusters of grapes, ripe pears, figs, and a basket of crackers and dark bread. You chose what you wanted, and the flight attendant cut it for you at the cart, along with a glass of port if you asked. This was the civilized pause, the slow, unhurried course that said the airline was in no rush to be done with you, that your evening in the sky could stretch as long as you liked. It required the galley to store and serve cheese at the right temperature, and it required the airline to accept that some passengers would simply sit and graze and drink port over the ocean for an hour. That was fine. That was the whole idea. The cheese cart was leisure made edible, an entire course built around the luxury of having nowhere else to be. Number 5, baked Alaska. This is a dessert that should be impossible. A mound of ice cream on a cake base, covered in meringue and browned by heat so the outside is warm and toasted while the ice cream inside stays frozen. Making it on the ground is a challenge of timing. Making it on an airplane was pure showmanship, and the great carriers did it to prove they could. Hot and cold in the same bite, thousands of feet in the air. It was a magic trick you could eat, and it sold the same promise the whole Golden Age was built on, that flying itself was a marvel. Number 4, Cherries Jubilee. When a blue flame appeared at the front of the cabin, you knew the flambe cart had arrived. Dark cherries were simmered in syrup, doused with warmed brandy, and set alight tableside, then spooned hot over cold vanilla ice cream. Yes, the airlines lit fires on airplanes on purpose, for dessert, and passengers loved every second of it. The hot, boozy cherries against the cold ice cream tasted wonderful, but the flavor was almost beside the point. This was theater. Today, a passenger cannot light a match on a plane. Back then, a controlled fire over your dessert was the height of glamour. Number 3, crepes Suzette. Here it is, the dish set on fire in front of you. Thin French pancakes folded into quarters, bathed in a sauce of caramelized sugar, butter, and orange, then flambéed at the cart in a burst of blue flame. The flight attendant made the whole thing right there in the aisle, finishing with a splash of Grand Marnier touched off so the flames rose over the pan. It was the most sophisticated dessert of the era, prepared live at your row over the Atlantic. The crepes were tender and citrusy, but the taste was only half of it. Watching a crew member execute a flaming French classic in a moving aircraft was the Golden Age distilled into a single moment. Number 2, the champagne itself. Running through every course was a river of champagne, and not the cheap kind. The premium carriers poured genuine French champagne freely in first class, refilling your glass without being asked. On the best flights, that meant vintage Dom Perignon in a real glass flute, not plastic. No limit, no charge, no card swipe. It flowed as long as the flight did. The airlines understood the feeling they were selling was celebration, and nothing says celebration like champagne poured without counting. When flying became a bus with wings, the free-flowing champagne was one of the first things to go. It was too generous to survive. Number 1, the 7-course Grand Service. On the flagship transatlantic routes of Pan Am, TWA, and the great European carriers, the full 7-course meal was not really a meal at all. It was an event that happened at 35,000 feet. Caviar and cocktails. Then soup, an appetizer, the carved roast or lobster from the cart, the cheese course with port, a flaming dessert prepared in the aisle, and finally coffee petit four and a liqueur. It stretched across hours, on real china with silver flatware and a linen tablecloth. Pan Am's kitchens, designed with Maximes de Paris, pulled it off in a galley the size of a closet. It was excessive, impractical, and gloriously beautiful, and it existed for one brief window when flying was not transportation but ceremony. We will almost certainly never see anything like it again. Here is my challenge. Next time you are wedged into a middle seat, chewing a pretzel from a foil bag, close your eyes and picture it. The carving cart in the aisle, the blue flame over the crepes, the caviar on crushed ice, and the champagne poured until you told them to stop. It was real, and most people had no idea they were living in a golden age until it was gone. So tell me in the comments, which of these 25 would you order first with one ticket back to 1960? Because these were not just airline meals. They were proof that we once treated the simple act of flying as something worth celebrating. And somewhere along the way, we forgot.